first thing he ever said to me should have been a warning. At the time, I thought it was just a little strange. Looking back, it was probably the moment I should have started paying attention. This happened in 2021 after I bought my first house. Nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom place outside Columbus, Ohio. The neighborhood seemed perfect, quiet, well-maintained, mostly older residents. The kind of area where people waved while walking dogs. Exactly what I wanted. The move itself took most of the weekend. Boxes everywhere, furniture half assembled, the usual chaos. On my second evening there, I was unloading groceries when a man approached from the house next door. Late 50s, gray hair, friendly smile, holding a coffee mug. He introduced himself as Frank. The conversation started normally. Where I moved from, what I did for work, the usual neighbor stuff. Then he said something odd. Long drive from Pittsburgh. I remember pausing, because I hadn't told him I moved from Pittsburgh. Not once. The moving truck still had the rental company's logo on it. No city information. Nothing. I laughed awkwardly and asked how he knew that. Frank smiled. Lucky guess. Then he walked away. At the time, I ignored it. Big mistake. Over the next few weeks, I saw Frank regularly, and every interaction became slightly stranger. One morning, he asked how my sister was enjoying college. Another day, he commented on a restaurant I'd visited the previous weekend. At one point, he even asked whether my dog was recovering from surgery. The problem was, I had never discussed any of those things with him. Not once. Each comment seemed minor on its own, but together they painted a disturbing picture. Frank somehow knew details about my life. Details I wasn't sharing. Details that weren't publicly obvious. I started wondering whether another neighbor had been talking about me. Maybe somebody overheard conversations. Maybe social media. Maybe anything. Then one night, I discovered the truth. Around 11 p.m., I was watching television when my internet suddenly stopped working. The outage lasted only a few minutes. Nothing unusual. But while checking connections near a side window, I happened to look outside and saw Frank, standing in his backyard, looking directly toward my house. The sight itself wasn't alarming. People go outside at night. The problem was what he was holding. Binoculars. My stomach immediately tightened. I watched for several seconds. Frank slowly lowered the binoculars, then went back inside. At first I convinced myself there was a harmless explanation. Bird watching, stargazing, anything. Then I remembered the conversations, the personal details, the constant knowledge. Suddenly, everything felt different. Over the next month, I became increasingly aware of Frank's behavior. Whenever I arrived home, he seemed to know. Whenever guests visited, he noticed. Whenever packages arrived, he commented on them. It felt impossible, like he spent all day watching the neighborhood. Then one Saturday afternoon, I accidentally confirmed it. I was trimming bushes along the property line when I dropped a tool behind a fence section separating our yards. While retrieving it, I noticed a small gap between boards, just large enough to see through. Curious, I looked. What I found made my blood run cold. Frank had positioned a chair directly beside an upstairs window facing my property. The chair sat beside a tripod, and mounted on the tripod was a camera, pointed directly toward my backyard. I called police that evening. Officers visited the property and spoke with Frank. The camera technically sat on his own property, which complicated things. But the investigation didn't end there, because several other neighbors came forward, and their stories sounded disturbingly familiar. Personal questions, knowledge they never shared, odd observations, constant awareness of their routines. Eventually, authorities obtained warrants related to unrelated complaints involving surveillance equipment. What they discovered shocked everyone. Frank had installed multiple cameras covering large portions of the neighborhood, some legal, some not, and he'd apparently spent years documenting the daily activities of people around him. Photographs, schedules, notes, records, boxes filled with information, including files containing details about me. To this day, I still don't know why he did it. The investigation never revealed a clear motive. No blackmail, no theft, no obvious crime beyond unlawful surveillance. Just obsession, a need to know everything happening around him. But the thing that still bothers me most isn't the cameras. It's that first conversation. Because before I ever unpacked a single box, before I'd spent a single night in that house, Frank already knew who I was. And that means he'd been watching long before I ever noticed him. For the first 3 months, I never saw her leave. Not once. At first, I thought it was just one of those odd neighborhood things you notice and then forget about. But the longer I lived there, the stranger it became. Because while I never saw her leave the house, she somehow seemed to know everything that happened outside of it. And eventually, I realized she knew things about me that she should never have known. This happened in 2018. I had just moved into a rental home outside Raleigh, North Carolina. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older houses, tree-lined streets, families, retirees, the kind of place where everybody seemed to know everybody. A few days after moving in, I was introducing myself to neighbors when somebody casually mentioned the woman across the street. Her name was Martha. She'd lived there for years, kept to herself, rarely spoke to anyone, nothing unusual. The odd part was what everyone said next. Nobody could remember the last time they'd actually seen her leave the house. I remember laughing, assuming they were exaggerating. People always create little neighborhood myths. I didn't think much of it, at least not initially. The house itself stood directly opposite mine. White siding, dark shutters, small front porch, perfectly ordinary. The curtains, however, were always closed. Every window, every day, every night. The house looked occupied, lights turned on and off. Packages appeared on the porch. Trash cans went out on collection days. Yet nobody ever seemed to enter or leave. At first, I barely paid attention. Then strange things started happening. One afternoon, I was mowing my lawn when a voice suddenly called out, "Your left tire is low." The voice startled me. I looked around. Nobody nearby. Then I spotted her, Martha, standing behind the screen door of her porch, watching. The distance between our houses was considerable, yet somehow she'd noticed my tire. A tire I hadn't even looked at that day. I thanked her and continued mowing. Later that evening I checked. She was right. The tire was low. I remember thinking it was a little strange, but not alarming. Then it happened again, and again, and again. A week later, she commented on a package that had arrived earlier that morning. Another time, she asked whether I'd enjoyed a restaurant I'd visited the previous weekend. A restaurant nearly 20 minutes away. The conversation froze me, because I hadn't mentioned that restaurant to anyone. Not neighbors, not co-workers, nobody. Yet somehow she knew. When I asked how, she simply smiled and changed the subject. The answer bothered me more than the question. Over time, I started paying closer attention to her house. And the more I watched, the stranger things became. No visitors, no deliveries beyond occasional groceries, no visible family, nothing. Yet the house remained clearly occupied. At night, I often noticed a faint light glowing behind one upstairs curtain. Always the same window, always late, sometimes until sunrise. And occasionally, I could swear I saw movement behind it, watching the street, watching the neighborhood, watching me. Around 6 months after moving in, I experienced something that genuinely unsettled me. I arrived home late after spending the evening with friends. Close to midnight. The neighborhood was quiet. Most houses were dark. As I walked toward my front door, I happened to glance across the street. One of Martha's upstairs curtains stood slightly open, just enough to reveal part of the room behind it, and standing inside the window was Martha, looking directly at me. Not unusual by itself. The disturbing part was the distance. The room was dark. The street was dark. Yet somehow she seemed to know exactly where I was standing. The moment our eyes met, she smiled, then closed the curtain. Something about the interaction left me deeply uncomfortable. The following morning, I discovered a note in my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper. Inside was a handwritten message. "You should lock the back door." That was it. No name, no explanation, just that sentence. My stomach immediately tightened, because I almost never used my back door, and the previous evening, I'd accidentally left it unlocked. Nobody should have known that. Nobody. For the first time, I seriously considered that someone was watching my property. Maybe not Martha, maybe someone else, but somebody. I installed a few inexpensive security cameras around the house. Nothing fancy, just enough to monitor entrances. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then one morning, I reviewed footage after receiving a motion alert. The timestamp showed approximately 3:17 a.m. The footage revealed someone standing at the edge of my property, motionless, watching the house. The image quality was poor. The figure remained partially obscured by darkness. but one detail stood out immediately. The person appeared to be wearing the exact same robe Martha wore whenever she stepped onto her porch. I contacted police. They reviewed the footage. Unfortunately, the image wasn't clear enough for identification. No action could be taken. Life continued, at least on the surface, but my anxiety kept growing. Because now every interaction with Martha felt different. Every comment, every observation, every conversation, the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. Then came the night everything changed. A severe thunderstorm rolled through the area. Strong winds, heavy rain. The power went out across the entire neighborhood. For several hours, the street sat completely dark. Around 1 a.m., I woke up thirsty and headed toward the kitchen. While passing the front window, I noticed something strange. A light, not outside, inside Martha's house. A flashlight beam moving through the downstairs rooms. Slowly, methodically, the sight caught my attention immediately, because I'd never seen activity inside the house before. Then another beam appeared, and another. Multiple flashlights, multiple people, moving through the home. My stomach dropped instantly. Someone had broken in, or so I thought. I called 911 immediately. Police arrived within minutes, and what they discovered shocked everyone, because Martha wasn't alone. She hadn't been living alone for years. Several people occupied portions of the home. Extended family members, relatives, individuals who rarely left the property. According to investigators, they spent most of their time inside, avoiding attention, avoiding interaction, essentially living in isolation. The situation itself wasn't illegal, but what happened next explained everything. During interviews, one family member casually admitted that Martha spent much of her day observing the neighborhood from upstairs windows. Not maliciously, just constantly. Hour after hour, day after day, watching, taking notes, remembering details. Apparently it had become an obsession, a routine, a hobby. She knew which cars belonged to which houses, who left for work, who returned late, who received visitors, everything. She'd essentially memorized the lives of everyone around her, including mine. A few weeks later, I moved, not because of danger, not because of crime, because the entire situation made me uncomfortable. And even now, years later, one detail still bothers me. The note about the back door. Because according to investigators, Martha denied writing it. Every family member denied it. Nobody ever admitted leaving it, which means one of two things happened. Either somebody lied, or somebody else was watching too. The first sign was so small that I almost ignored it. A kitchen cabinet. That's it. One cabinet door. Left open. Nothing broken. Nothing stolen. Nothing dramatic. Just a cabinet that I was absolutely certain I had closed before leaving for work. Looking back now, I wish that had been the only thing that happened. Because over the next several months, I became convinced someone was entering my house while I was gone. And eventually, I discovered I was right. This happened in 2020. At the time, I had recently rented a small house outside Portland, Oregon. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, low crime, the kind of area where people left decorations on their porches year-round. The house itself wasn't large. One story, 2 bedrooms, small backyard, exactly what I needed. One of the first people I met was my neighbor, a man named Richard. Richard looked to be in his early 60s. Retired, friendly, the type of guy who always seemed to be outside, working in his yard, washing his truck, walking his dog. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to know him. And honestly, I liked him, at first. The first strange thing happened about 3 weeks after moving in. I returned home from work and noticed a kitchen cabinet standing open. I specifically remembered closing it that morning, but I dismissed it immediately. People forget things. No big deal. A few days later, it happened again. Different cabinet, same situation. Again, I blamed myself. Then small things started moving. A television remote sitting in a different spot. A bathroom towel folded differently. A dining room chair slightly repositioned. Nothing major. Nothing impossible to explain. Yet the frequency bothered me. Because I lived alone. Nobody else had access. At least that's what I believed. Around that same time, Richard started making odd comments. Nothing overtly alarming. just strangely specific observations. One afternoon, he mentioned a movie I had watched the previous evening. Another time, he asked whether I enjoyed a pizza place I'd ordered from. The comments felt weird, but not impossible. Maybe he saw delivery drivers. Maybe he heard the television through open windows. Maybe anything. I kept finding explanations. Then came the refrigerator incident. One evening, I arrived home after spending the entire day out of town for work. I opened the refrigerator and immediately noticed something wrong. A bottle of orange juice sat on a different shelf. That might sound ridiculous, but I was certain, absolutely certain. I always kept drinks in the same place. Always. The realization bothered me enough that I checked the rest of the kitchen. Nothing missing. Nothing damaged. Everything normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody had been inside. A week later, I bought a small indoor security camera. Nothing fancy, just something pointed toward the living room while I was away. The first few days revealed nothing. Then came Thursday. I remember checking footage during lunch and nearly dropping my phone because somebody appeared inside my house. A man, standing in my kitchen. The image quality wasn't perfect, but I recognized him immediately. Richard, my neighbor. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen, convinced I had to be misunderstanding something. Then the footage continued. Richard opened the refrigerator, looked inside, walked through the living room, then disappeared down the hallway, like he belonged there, like it was completely normal. My stomach dropped. I left work immediately, called police, and headed home. Officers arrived shortly afterward. I showed them the footage. Everyone agreed it was Richard. The obvious question was, how had he gotten inside? There were no signs of forced entry, no damaged windows, nothing. Police interviewed Richard that evening. His explanation shocked me. According to him, the landlord had once given him a spare key years earlier, supposedly for emergencies involving previous tenants. Richard claimed he forgot he still had it. Forgot. As if accidentally entering someone else's house multiple times was normal. The explanation sounded ridiculous, and police clearly thought so too. But things became much worse, because when investigators searched his property, they discovered additional keys. Lots of them. Dozens. Some labeled. Some not. Many apparently connected to houses throughout the neighborhood. Current homes. Former rentals. Properties belonging to people who had moved away years earlier. The discovery immediately raised questions. How long had this been happening? How many homes had he entered? Nobody knew. Not yet. The investigation expanded quickly, and the more authorities uncovered, the stranger things became. Several former residents reported similar experiences. Objects moving, doors unlocked, items appearing in unusual places. Small disturbances nobody could explain. Most had dismissed the incidents as forgetfulness, exactly like I did, until they learned about Richard. Then suddenly everything made sense. What truly terrified me wasn't theft, because Richard wasn't stealing anything. At least not much. The frightening part was that he seemed interested in observation. Routine. Access. According to investigators, he often entered homes briefly, walked around, looked at belongings, then left. No obvious motive. No financial gain. Just intrusion. The worst detail emerged several weeks later. During the investigation, authorities reviewed dates connected to various complaints. One date stood out. A weekend when I'd traveled to visit family, gone for 3 days. According to security footage recovered from another source, Richard entered my house twice during that trip. Twice. And stayed nearly an hour each time. The realization made me physically sick, because I still don't know what he did inside. I only know he was there. Walking through rooms I considered private, opening cabinets, looking through things, existing inside my personal space without permission. The legal process took months. Charges followed. Protective orders were issued. And eventually Richard moved away. The neighborhood returned to normal. At least outwardly. But the experience permanently changed the way I think about privacy. Because before that situation, I believed danger usually announced itself. Broken locks. Forced entry. Obvious signs. Now I know better. Sometimes the person violating your privacy waves at you every morning. Sometimes they're the friendly neighbor next door. Sometimes they're the person everyone trusts. And sometimes, they already have a key. Years later, I still check my doors before bed. Twice. Sometimes 3 times. Not because I'm afraid someone will break in, Because I learned that occasionally, they don't have to,